So I've just started thinking about gospel culture in a previous video, and particularly started to think about how churches grow, and that might be a church that has been for a long time a smaller church, and then starts to experience growth or want growth, and it might also be about what happens when you have a newer church plant that starts very small but starts to grow. Now, a couple of bits of background here. First of all, just to say where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the position that I don't think that there is a correct size of church. That it's going to depend on your context and your community and the needs there, and things will look different in different places. That means that there are benefits to churches that stay small, particularly if those small churches replicate and replant. And in fact, if anything, my general preference would be for that kind of thing. But also, there's nothing wrong with churches growing large and larger, and there can be benefits to that, particularly the ability of a church to have a greater reach, to have greater resources, to support others and to bless out beyond where they are. And then some biography. My history is that I've spent time in all different sizes of churches for different periods of time. So I grew up in what was one of the larger churches in Bradford, a place called Sunbridge Road Mission, and I think at its peak. So this wasn't big in sort of national terms or even in terms of some of the other churches that are in Bradford today, but in its day it was considered big. Probably when you sort of added up everybody together, there was probably 400 or 500 people, maybe more, connected into the church. Also, sorry, my teens, that church experienced significant decline, and I'm really encouraged today, having visited the church I grew up in, to see a church that is growing quite significantly again. I then, at university, went to a place called Christ Church Fulwood, a very large Anglican church, free Sunday services, lots of students, church that was involved in different types of mission and revitalisation and replanting, the wider sort of Anglican church in Sheffield. But found myself going to a little Brethren Gospel Hall in my holidays back in Bradford, where there was only about 20 people left. Post-university, I was at a church in Kent of about, I think it was probably about 80, 90 people when I first went there. It grew, I think there's probably about 150, 200 there today. Then went to Theological College at Oak Hill, had some placements with some very large churches and some very small churches, and one placement with a growing sort of medium-sized church, but it was only like 7 years old, I think, when I went there, so a new church plant meeting in the school hall. And then we came up to the West Midlands, and I was invited to be the pastor of a church with Brethren roots, and we turned up at a church of about 70 80 people there, sort of regularly involved each week, in a building that held 100. I think it held 80 comfortably, it held 100 okay, and you could squeeze 110 in very uncomfortably. That was the kind of physical sort of constraints on us. And primarily the church was sort of, I would say, sort of white, lower middle class, upper working class, old generation. So we had a lot of older people, but we also had lots of families with young children and teenagers. So it was multi-generation. Ethnically, we had some Afro-Caribbeans, not many, people that had been in there for years and had been kept going, even though times have been tough to be an Afro-Caribbean from the English generation in the United Kingdom. And there was a Punjabi family and a family who were OM missionaries, Operation Mobilisation. That's from Singapore. The wife was Canadian. So that was the sort of the general gist of things. And when we arrived, one of the things that I personally felt moved by was the need to encourage the church to be more outward looking in mission and evangelism, to be doing more in terms of blessing and serving the wider community, and doing more in terms of reaching people with the good news. And we had to work through lots of challenges and lots of questions about whether or not we wanted to grow, and what that would involve. And I remember at the time thinking about all sorts of possibilities. Should we move out of that limited building on a Sunday, keep it as a place for midweek activities and office space and that kind of thing, and rent a school theatre or hall or something like that to give us space on a Sunday? We had conversations about whether or not we could rebuild, whether or not we should move, whether or not we should plant. And I think there was a recognition that planting would be challenging, both because we weren't too sure where we would plant to, and who would go and what the cost would be on the church. It still in many ways felt that it was potentially fragile if we lost people. Now, eventually what happened was some people, some of the members, some of the leaders actually were saying, well, other churches, we've been to other churches and they have multiple services. Maybe we could do that. I remember being resistant at the time. I was like, yeah, I've been a member of such a church, but those tend to be very big churches. Is that something we want to be doing? How would we make it work? And then something clicked for me. In fact, I would say God spoke to me and said, you know, you could spend all your time working hard for years trying to get a change of venue or a new building or whatever, or you could enjoy the opportunity to have your building being used maximally for the gospel and having lots and lots of opportunities to share the good news and to teach and disciple people that are hungry for God, in that sense that God would provide those people. So we went with it cautiously at the start with a trial period, and then we agreed to continue. Alongside that, we had a youth group that ran on a Sunday night, and Sarah and I were asked to go and do some teaching into that youth group, and we were asked at the end if we would continue to do some stuff, because particularly some of the older young people wanted more Bible teaching, wanted to go deeper. And so we continued. And where there'd been a youth group for 11 to 18s, we created a group effectively for 16, I think we said 16 to 25s, was the kind of where we pitched it. What we found was that some of the some of the 16, 17 and 18-year-olds, they didn't want to be part of that. They wanted to keep being part of the existing youth group. But we also started to pick up that there were people outside of that age range that wanted to come. Most notably, we had a couple of ladies in their 80s. I don't know, I think a lady in her late 80s and a lady probably in her late 70s, I think, in terms of age at the time. And they came and buttonholed me and said, we hear something happens on a Sunday night. We used to have Sunday evening services. We would like something on a Sunday evening. We hear that there's Bible teaching. We hear that there's pizza and chips. We like pizza and chips too. And so we actually went back to this group of young people and we said, how do you feel about these older people joining us? How do you feel about us opening it up? And they said, we would love to have them with us. They looked, those from the church looked to these older ladies as sort of like honorary aunts, sort of grandma type figures. And so they started coming. One of the other things that started to happen at this stage was that we had young people that had come through the youth club, friends of young people that are part of the church. And we saw a shift in their thinking and their lives as they began to grasp the gospel as they got deeper into God's word. And they were becoming Christians. And so the question then was this: if they are becoming Christians, do we expect them to come on a Sunday morning? Because our church constitution said that to be a member of the church, you had to attend the Sunday morning, the 10:30 service. And so we were going to think about it. We thought there are a number of reasons why these young people from secular backgrounds might not make it to a Sunday morning service. We realised that if you like, the sort of the time barriers and those kinds of cultural barriers, I guess, as well, between 10:30 and 7 o'clock were as big as some geographical barriers might be. And so we thought, why should we try and get them to come to church? Why don't we take church to them? And so we began to develop things. We began to include communion regularly, about once a month. We did baptisms on a Saturday night. We introduced praise as part of the time. So we ate food together, then we had praise, usually with the help of sort of YouTube videos of songs. It meant that we could be louder and more lively than we had the space to be on a Sunday morning. So all of that was happening. And then we had some young, middle-aged as well, mums living in some local flats. They knew a bit about us from some of the kids' clubs. They started coming down with their families on a Sunday night and joining in, completely non-Christian backgrounds. We were probably one of the first churches to have a cigarette break. Most of them eventually got rehoused elsewhere, and so we lost them. But then we started to pick up some of the homeless people, some of the people living in the hostels. I've talked about this in previous videos as well, haven't I? We began to pick up people that were ex-convicts that were out of prison and living in the bail hostels. And we began to pick up people with drug and alcohol issues and prostitutes as well. And they were coming initially for the food, but they began to be drawn more into what was happening. The other strand of what happened was that we picked up some South Americans. Initially, one guy came and somebody translated for him. He invited his friends. And then families were moving here. We had to think a bit more about how we did translation for perhaps 20, 30 people from Ecuador and Bolivia and those kinds of places. And that was really exciting. And our 11:15 congregation was bursting at the seams with this, and some of them were coming back on Sunday nights as well. And we're finding ways to do extra English conversation for them, that kind of thing. And then it was New Year, we had a New Year's party. And then on the following Saturday, we had a day of prayer at the church. And at the end, one of our Ecuadorians made it towards the end, and he had brought some friends with him, a Mexican family. This Mexican family, they were worshipping with another church. They were here seeking asylum because of the drug gangs and what they had done to them as a family. And they had just started meeting other South Americans, other Spanish speakers, and we were inviting them back to their home on a Saturday night and studying the Bible. And they'd ended up with about 30, 40 people crowding into their house, into their home office accommodation, bursting at the seams. And they were trying to work out what to do next as well. And we realised that there was an overlap, that they knew people we didn't. We knew people, so we knew people they didn't. They knew people we didn't. And then there was people that were basically going to both. And so we agreed, we actually agreed it very quickly, to let them come and gather on a Saturday evening. And it became this kind of additional thing, sort of half church plant, half another congregation. A Saturday night congregation. And one of the things we talked about at the time was that we are intentionally multicultural, multi-ethnic. We don't want something that is monocultural, a kind of homogenous unit principle. So what we did was we insisted that yes, there could be something that we would work with where Spanish would be the main language, but there would have to be a multicultural intentionality about it. And there was, not least because actually there are numerous cultural differences within South America, but also because they were picking up people from other backgrounds as well. And they were also multiplying ministries. They were doing ESOL classes and things in the week alongside the ESOL classes that we already were running. All sorts of things happening. So all of this is happening, and we're getting busier as a church. Our ministries are multiplying. One of the things we did through that time was we bought a building that was at the top of the driveway. Our church building was like down this narrow driveway. The old brethren 100 years ago had built this place set back from the road to keep it quiet. And there were benefits actually to being sort of not out on the public space and visible for things we wanted to do, but you want to be running ESOL classes for Muslims and that kind of thing. You don't want to draw too much attention to yourself. But it brought its restrictions as well in terms of visibility, in terms of being able to do things. So we buy this building, it gives us a bit more space to do things. We run a community cafe. From there we have our own little food bank, that kind of thing. And then the other thing that we did was our Sunday night congregation had grown. That was filling, we did it cafe style, so we got to about 30, 40 and it was feeling full. So we tried a Sunday afternoon meeting. And it never really took off. We had, I think, one family, we had a couple of other people come. That never really took off. But we, in the week, have been doing uh, an after school club with the help of OM teams. But when those OM teams stopped, we realised we didn't have the capacity to keep running them. But we realised we did have capacity with a few people to do something on a Sunday afternoon. And so we started a monthly messy church. And we were probably getting 30, 40, maybe more people, children and adults together, families staying, all different backgrounds, Polish families, families from Muslims, Pakistani and other backgrounds coming in and hearing about Jesus. And I think that if we had been there longer term, if the pandemic and that kind of thing had not cut our time short, we would have been looking at moving maybe initially to fortnightly and then to weekly with that. So in effect, in our building we had 5 congregations. We also had people that joined us midweek for an older people's group, and some of them didn't have any other sort of church to go to. We had people that were unable to make it to community life groups, home groups in the week because of work patterns and family needs. But we had at various times between probably about 170, 180 and maybe over 200 people connected in. I think probably 170 getting along regularly, so, at least once or twice a month. But others that sort of came with different levels of commitment. So this church has grown from about 80 to between 180 and 200 over 10 years. But what I wanted to do was to give you that kind of backstory, really to help you think and engage a bit more with these questions of growth and church culture and the challenges and opportunities. Because what I want to do in some videos is just talk about where some of those challenges are, and really to help you think about not just growth, but about growth and multiplication. Because what we were doing was we were multiplying these congregations with the possibility that some might become fully fledged churches in their own right. And also we were looking at other opportunities to plant or to help with revitalisation. So towards the end of my time at Bearwood, we looked at a couple of possibilities. I had a couple of requests for help with revitalisation, and in fact we did give specific help to one church, which is now Hope Church in Smethwick, was West Smethwick Congregational Church. So the replant there. And so this little sort of video series is really for those of you that are thinking about church growth, church multiplication, and retaining healthy gospel culture. And by the way, I say this, I think both saying, look, I think there were things that we got right, and there were positives about the gospel culture. I think there were blessings. I think, but also to say, look, there were tons of things we got wrong. And what I want to do is help you to learn from my mistakes. And just to be explicitly clear, if I talk about mistakes, they will be mine, not other people's mistakes. It's for them to help you learn from theirs. So I think that's probably a good time to pause here now. I hope that even just hearing some of that story will have been helpful, and I would encourage you to get involved in some discussion and to get in touch with me directly via faithroot.com, and the contact page there if there are specific things you want to talk about, or you can use the comments on YouTube and on Facebook as well, where this is shared. Now, I can't sort of finish a video like this without just one of those appeals I make from time to time, because the reason I do these videos, the reason that I write stuff on faithroot.com is because my passion is to help people be trained and equipped for gospel ministry, particularly into church planting or church revitalisation, particularly into urban contexts. So I would encourage you to use all the resources that we've got here, but also here's something important. For some people, the best way to learn more, and you might be at that stage, would actually be just to actually come and learn with us. So here's the deal. If you would like to get some training and mentoring and equipping in context, and you're not worried about getting degree qualifications and that kind of thing, that's not your priority, or those kinds of things are not accessible to you, then I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to, find a way of connecting with us in person, if you live locally in the West Midlands, that's great, that's already there. But for other people, what it might mean is this. It might mean that you plan to move to the West Midlands, to Birmingham, all of that country, find a home here, get settled into a community. And here's the deal. Whether that's because other people will financially support you, or you've got the finances to support yourself at this stage in life, or you do a bit of work, a bit of tent making, a bit of learning and a bit of ministry, in that sense, I think that's for you to work out. But the deal will be this. We'd love to spend time with you. You can come and be part either of our church for a bit of time, or North Birmingham, or another local church. What we'd encourage you to do is just to spend a couple of years living in an area, getting to know your neighbours, opening up your home, like my friend who planted the Spanish-speaking church did initially, and see what God does. And in return, we'll provide that training and that mentoring and that fellowship. And the result of that might be that at the end of 2 years, you've actually planted a church here, or you need a bit of extra time, another year or so, or you realise that it is time to move on and to do something different, maybe going into pastoral ministry in another context, maybe planting in another context. Whatever happens, I don't think anybody's lost out there. I think it is still all a positive. So again, if that is of interest to you, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.